The call came at midnight, and Ethan Rowe almost didn't answer. A woman's voice, low and urgent, offering him more money than he'd made all year to repair a deck at a house no one in town knew existed. 3 days later, standing on rotting wood above black water, he'd realized the job was never about construction. It was about what happens when two people running from different kinds of ruin collide in the worst possible place. Before you find out how far their secrets go, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun hadn't cleared the pines yet when Ethan's truck rattled down the gravel lane toward the Hale property, sawdust still stuck to his boots from yesterday's job at the Mitchell's place. He'd driven past this turnoff 1,000 times without noticing it. Hell, most people in Cedar Falls didn't even know the old Garrison estate had sold. The realtor gossip said some investor bought it sight unseen, cash deal, no inspection. Typical rich person bullshit, Ethan figured. Buy something broken, hire locals to fix it, never show up. Except Vivian Hale had shown up. And she'd called him directly. That was the first weird thing. He didn't advertise. Didn't have a website or business cards. His work came through word of mouth, neighbors who knew he showed up on time and didn't overcharge. So when his phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. 3 nights ago and a woman's voice said, "Mr. Rowe, I need someone who can be trusted with a difficult project," he almost hung up thinking it was a scam. But she'd said his full name, said she'd heard he was reliable, discreet, good with his hands. That last part could have sounded suggestive, but her tone was all business, cool, measured, like she was conducting an interview she'd already decided the outcome of. She'd offered him $6,000 to rebuild a deck. That was triple what the job should cost, and Ethan had learned a long time ago that when someone throws around that kind of money, there's always a catch. "I'll need to see it first," he'd said. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. Then she'd hung up. Now, pulling up to the house, Ethan understood why she'd been so specific about the time. The place looked like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered stone and timber perched on a slope that dropped straight into Crescent Lake. The deck she'd mentioned wasn't just damaged. It was a death trap, cantilevered out over the water on supports so rotted he could see daylight through the joists from 50 feet away. He killed the engine and sat for a moment studying the house. No cars in the driveway. No lights on inside. If she was here, she was either still asleep or watching him from one of those dark windows, waiting to see if he'd bolt. Ethan got out. The air smelled like pine sap and wet stone. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called. That eerie tremolo that always made him think of late-night feedings with Jonah when the boy was a baby, and sleep was a luxury Ethan couldn't afford. Those days felt like another lifetime, but also like yesterday. Grief did that, collapsed time into something that didn't follow normal rules. He walked around the side of the house, boots crunching on gravel, and that's when he saw her. Vivian Hale was standing on the deck. Not near it. On it. Right in the center, where the boards looked worst, her arms crossed, staring out at the water like she was daring the whole structure to collapse beneath her. "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered, breaking into a jog. "Ma'am, you need to step back." She turned, and the words died in his throat. He'd expected someone older. Vivian Hale had sounded ageless on the phone, that flat corporate tone people used when they'd spent too long in boardrooms. But the woman looking at him couldn't have been more than 35, maybe 40. Dark hair pulled back tight, sharp cheekbones, eyes so pale they looked almost colorless in the early light. She wore black jeans and a plain white shirt, nothing fancy, but she stood like someone used to people doing exactly what she told them. "Mr. Rowe." Not a question. "That deck's not safe." He stopped at the threshold where the boards met the stone foundation, extending one hand like he was approaching a spooked animal. "Seriously, I can see the supports bowing from here." "I know." She didn't move. "I wanted you to see what you're working with." "I can see it fine from over here. Can you?" Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe, or challenge. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like the only way to understand how broken something is to put yourself right in the middle of it." Ethan stared at her. That was the kind of metaphorical bullshit he'd expect from someone who'd clearly spent too much time around therapists or self-help books. But the way she said it, flat, factual, made it sound less like philosophy and more like a simple observation. "Step back," he said again, quieter. "Please." This time she moved. Slow, deliberate steps that made the boards groan with every shift of weight. When she reached the stone, Ethan noticed her hands were shaking. She shoved them in her pockets. "Can you fix it?" she asked. He looked past her at the deck. The frame was original to the house, probably 70 years old, built before modern codes required proper waterproofing or treated lumber. Half the joists were split, the ledger board had pulled away from the house in places, and the railing looked like it would collapse if someone sneezed on it. "Depends what you mean by fix," Ethan said. "I can rebuild it. New frame, new decking, proper footings. But it won't be cheap, and it won't be quick. I don't care about cheap." Vivian pulled a hand out of her pocket and gestured at the lake. "I care about this view. I bought this house for this view, and I want to sit out here and see it without wondering if I'm about to die." "Why'd you buy a house with a deck you can't use?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, but Vivian didn't flinch. "Because no one else wanted it," she said simply. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He walked past her onto the deck, carefully, testing each board before committing his weight, and knelt to examine the ledger connection. Up close, it was worse than he'd thought. Water damage, rot, insect tunnels. Whoever built this originally had done decent work, but 70 years of freeze-thaw cycles and zero maintenance had turned it into a catastrophe waiting to happen. "You're lucky this hasn't collapsed already," he muttered. "I'm not lucky." He glanced back. Vivian was still standing at the threshold, arms crossed again, watching him with that unreadable expression. "Figure of speech," Ethan said. "Words matter." "Yeah, well." He straightened, dusting off his hands. "Lucky or not, you can't use this. I'll need to tear it down to the foundation and start over. 6 weeks, minimum. Maybe 8 if the weather turns." "How much? For the materials and labor?" He did quick math in his head. 12,000. That includes proper ledger bolts, composite decking, code-compliant railing. It'll last another 50 years, easy. Vivian nodded once, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. "I'll pay you 15 if you start today." Ethan blinked. "Today? I assume you have other jobs." "Yeah, but..." "Cancel them. I'll cover any losses." She pulled a checkbook from her back pocket, an actual checkbook, like it was 1987, and clicked open a pen. "Who do I make it out to?" "Hold on." Ethan stepped off the deck, suddenly needing solid ground under his feet. "You don't just throw money at people and expect them to drop everything." "Why not? It works." "Not with me." Vivian looked up from the checkbook, and for the first time Ethan saw something other than cool control in her expression. Curiosity, maybe, or surprise. "I have a son," he said. "I pick him up from school at 3. I coach his baseball team on Thursdays. I don't work weekends. So if you want this done, it happens on my schedule, not yours." The words came out harder than he'd planned, but he was tired of people assuming his time was for sale just because he worked with his hands. Money didn't change the fact that Jonah needed consistency, routine, a dad who showed up when he said he would. Vivian closed the checkbook. "Fair enough," she said. "What's your schedule?" "I can start Monday. Work 7 to 2:30 on weekdays, take Sunday and Saturday off. 8 weeks, maybe less if I don't hit complications." "And the other jobs you mentioned?" "I'll finish them first. 2 days, max." Vivian studied him for a long moment, and Ethan had the uncomfortable feeling she was running calculations he couldn't see, weighing options, assessing risk, deciding if he was worth the wait. Finally, she nodded. "Monday, then, 7 a.m. She held out the checkbook again, but Ethan shook his head. "I don't take money up front." "Why not?" "Because if something goes wrong, I don't want you thinking I owe you." "What if you think I won't pay?" "Then I don't take the job." Another flicker of something crossed her face, respect maybe, or recognition. She tucked the checkbook away. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Yeah?" Ethan picked up his tape measure from where he'd set it on the railing. "What'd you expect? Someone more flexible?" Flexible's another word for desperate. Vivian almost smiled. Almost. "And you're not desperate." "I didn't say that." Ethan headed toward his truck, suddenly wanting to be anywhere but under her gaze. "I said I have a son. That's different." He was halfway to the driveway when she called after him. "Mr. Rowe?" He turned. Vivian was still standing by the deck, hands in her pockets again, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. "Thank you," she said. For what? For not lying to me. Ethan frowned. About the deck? About anything. Then she walked back into the house, leaving him standing there with no idea what the hell she was talking about. Jonah was eating cereal at the kitchen table when Ethan got home, still in his Batman pajamas, even though it was almost 8:30. The Saturday morning cartoons were blaring from the living room, some hyperactive show about talking animals that made Ethan's head hurt. "You're back early," Jonah said, not looking up from his bowl. "Job didn't take long." Ethan dropped his keys on the counter and poured himself coffee from the pot he'd made at 5 a.m., before the sun was even up. It was lukewarm and bitter, but he drank it anyway. "You eat breakfast already, or just dessert?" "It's cereal. That's breakfast." Cereal with chocolate marshmallows is dessert pretending to be breakfast. Jonah grinned, still not looking at him. The kid was 9 years old and already had his mother's smile. Crooked, mischievous, the kind that made you forgive him even when you knew you shouldn't. Ethan's chest tightened the way it always did when he saw Claire in their son's face. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the accident, and some days it felt like 30. Other days it felt like she'd just walked out of the room. "Dad?" Ethan blinked. "Yeah? You okay?" "Fine. Just thinking." He refilled his mug even though he didn't want more coffee. "What do you want to do today?" Jonah shrugged, scraping the last of the cereal from his bowl. "Can we go to the lake?" "It's too cold for swimming." "Not swimming. Skipping rocks. You said you'd teach me how to make them bounce more than 3 times. Ethan had said that. 2 months ago, maybe 3. He'd been saying it for a year, actually, always finding reasons to push it off. Too busy, too tired, too hard to go back to the lake where Claire used to take Jonah when he was little, before everything went to hell. But Vivian Hale's house was on the lake, and Monday he'd be there every day. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Okay, let's go." Jonah's head snapped up, eyes wide. "Really?" "Really. Get dressed." The kid was gone before Ethan finished the sentence, thundering up the stairs like a herd of elephants. Ethan listened to the chaos of drawers slamming and hangers clattering and felt something loosen in his chest. Small victories. That's what the grief counselor had called them, back when Ethan was still going to those sessions. Small moments where life felt normal again, even if just for a minute. He hadn't been to a session in over a year. Maybe that was a problem. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, he didn't have time to think about it now. Crescent Lake was 20 minutes outside Cedar Falls, tucked into a valley where the mountains came down steep and the water stayed cold even in August. Ethan parked at the public access point, a gravel lot with a boat ramp and a single picnic table covered in carved initials, and Jonah bolted for the shore before Ethan even had his seatbelt off. "Stay where I can see you," Ethan called. "I know!" The kid did know. Ethan had drilled water safety into him since he was old enough to walk. Still, watching Jonah crouch at the waterline, picking through stones, made Ethan's pulse kick up the way it always did when his son was near anything that could hurt him. He grabbed the old canvas bag from the truck bed, the one Claire used to pack with sandwiches and juice boxes for their lake days, and walked down to the shore. "Find any good ones?" he asked. Jonah held up a flat, smooth stone, dark gray with a white stripe down the middle. "This one? That'll work. Remember what I told you about the grip? Pointer finger on the edge, thumb on top. Good. Now you want to throw it sidearm. Keep it low to the water. It's not about how hard you throw, it's about the spin." Jonah wound up and let it fly. The stone hit the water and sank immediately. "Damn," the kid muttered. "Language. You say it all the time. I'm an adult. I've earned the right to make bad choices." Ethan picked up his own stone and demonstrated the throw, flicking his wrist at the last second. The rock skipped once, twice, 3 times before disappearing. "See? Spin!" They spent the next hour throwing rocks, Jonah getting more frustrated with each failed attempt until finally, miraculously, one of his stones skipped 4 times. The kid whooped so loud a pair of ducks took off from the far shore. "Did you see that?" "I saw it." 4, that's more than you." Yeah, don't get cocky." But Ethan was grinning. He couldn't help it. They sat on the picnic table after that, eating the peanut butter sandwiches Ethan had thrown together, watching the light change on the water. This was the part of the lake Ethan liked best. The quiet after the effort. The way the mountains held the sound close. No traffic, no voices, Just wind and water and the occasional bird. Dad? Jonah's voice was quieter now, the sugar rush from the cereal long gone. Yeah, bud? Do you think Mom would be proud of me? For the 4 skips? Ethan's throat closed. He stared at the sandwich in his hands, trying to figure out what the right answer was. The true answer. The answer that wouldn't hurt. Yeah, he said finally. She'd be proud of you for everything. Jonah nodded, swinging his legs against the table. I don't remember her as much anymore. That's okay. Is it? Ethan looked at his son, really looked at him. 9 years old, growing up fast, already forgetting the sound of his mother's laugh, the way she used to sing off-key in the car, the shape of her hands. Yeah, Ethan said. It's okay. That's what pictures are for. And stories. And stories. They sat for a while longer until the sun dipped behind the pines and the temperature dropped. On the drive home, Jonah fell asleep in the passenger seat, head tilted against the window, and Ethan felt that tightness in his chest again. Small victories. He thought about Vivian Hale, standing on that rotting deck, daring it to break. He thought about the way her hands had shaken when she stepped back, and he wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Monday morning came cold and clear. Ethan loaded his truck with tools, circular saw, miter saw, drill, pry bars, a generator for power, and made the drive to the Hale property before the sun was up. He told Jonah he'd be working a new job for a while, big project, good money. The kid had asked if it meant they could get the new Xbox, and Ethan had said maybe, which was the closest he ever came to saying yes. Vivian's car was in the driveway when he arrived. A black sedan, expensive but not flashy, the kind of thing someone bought when they had money but didn't want to advertise it. Ethan parked next to it and started unloading, trying not to think too hard about the fact that she was already awake, already watching. Sure enough, the front door opened before he reached the deck. Mr. Rowe. Vivian stepped out, wearing the same black jeans and white shirt from before, like she'd never changed. Coffee? I'm good. I made a full pot. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to owe her anything, not even caffeine, but the truth was he'd rushed out without finishing his own pot, and his head was already starting to ache. Yeah, he said. Okay, thanks. She disappeared inside and came back with 2 mugs, plain white ceramic, no logo or design. She handed him one and kept the other, cradling it in both hands like she was cold. You always up this early? Ethan asked. I don't sleep much. Why not? Vivian looked at him over the rim of her mug, and Ethan had the sudden sense he'd stepped on a landmine. Bad habit, she said finally. They stood in the driveway drinking coffee in silence while the sky turned from black to gray to pale gold. Ethan kept waiting for her to say something, ask about the timeline, the materials, the plan. But she just stood there, watching the light change. Finally, he set down his mug. I should get started. Of course. Vivian stepped back. I'll stay out of your way. You don't have to leave, it's your house. I know, but I will anyway. She went inside and Ethan got to work. Tearing down the old deck was brutal, physical labor, the kind that made his shoulders burn and his hands blister even through gloves. Every board he pried up released the smell of rot and stagnant water, and more than once he found evidence of animals nesting in the framework. Mice? Squirrels? Something bigger that might have been a raccoon. By noon he'd cleared half the decking and exposed the full extent of the damage. It was worse than he'd thought. The main beam had a crack running through it, and 2 of the support posts had sunk into the mud, pulling the whole structure out of level. He was kneeling in the dirt, measuring the footer depth, when he heard footsteps behind him. How bad is it? Ethan looked up. Vivian was standing at the edge of the excavation, holding a plate with a sandwich and an apple. Bad, he said. I'm going to need to replace the beam and reset the posts. That's another week at least. So 10 weeks total. Maybe. She nodded, like she'd expected it. I brought you lunch. You didn't have to do that. I know, I did it anyway. She set the plate on a level section of ground and turned to go. Wait. Vivian paused. Why me? Ethan asked. You've got money. You could have hired a company. Someone with a crew, insurance, references. Why'd you call me? She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the lake. Because you were the only person who didn't ask me who I was, she said. Then she walked back inside, leaving Ethan alone with a sandwich he didn't remember agreeing to and questions he didn't know how to ask. The days fell into a rhythm. Ethan arrived at 7, worked until 2:30, picked up Jonah from school. Vivian stayed inside most of the time, but every day at noon she brought him lunch. Sandwiches, salads, once a thermos of soup that was so good, Ethan asked if she'd made it herself. "I did," she said. "Didn't figure you for a cook." "I'm full of surprises." She was. The more time Ethan spent at the house, the more contradictions he noticed. Vivian dressed like someone who didn't care about appearances, but her car was spotless. She said she didn't sleep, but he'd see lights on in the house at 3 a.m. when he drove past on his way home from a restless night of his own. She was polite, formal, careful with her words, but every now and then she'd say something so blunt it felt like a slap, like the day he found her standing on the construction site, staring at the torn-up ground. "You're making a mess," she said. "That's what happens when you build something new. It gets messy first. Does it get better?" "Eventually." Vivian looked at him, and Ethan saw something raw in her expression, something that made him think she wasn't talking about the deck anymore. "I hope you're right," she said. By the end of the second week, Ethan had the new support post set and the main beam installed. The frame was starting to take shape, solid and square. And for the first time since he'd started the project, it felt like he was building something instead of just tearing down. Jonah asked about it one night at dinner, pushing spaghetti around his plate. "What's the new job like?" "It's fine." "Who's the lady?" Ethan looked up. "What lady?" "The one you're working for. You said it's a big house on the lake. Is she nice?" "She's—" Ethan trailed off, trying to figure out how to describe Vivian Hale to a 9-year-old. "She's complicated." "What's that mean?" "It means I don't know her well enough to say." Jonah grinned. "You like her." "I didn't say that." "You didn't say you don't." "Eat your dinner." But the kid was right, in that infuriating way kids always were. Ethan didn't dislike Vivian, and that was the problem. Because liking someone meant letting them in, and Ethan had spent 3 years making sure no one got close enough to matter. It was easier that way, safer, less likely to hurt. Chet. 3 weeks into the project, Vivian stopped bringing lunch to the site. Instead, she started eating with him, sitting on the one finished section of decking with her own plate, asking questions about the work. "Why composite instead of wood?" she asked one day. "Lasts longer, doesn't rot, doesn't splinter, costs more up front, but you save in the long run." "Like most good investments." "I guess." "You don't sound convinced." Ethan shrugged. "I don't know much about investments. I build things. That's different." "Is it?" Vivian picked at her sandwich, turkey, same as always. "You're putting time and materials into something with the expectation that it'll hold value. That's an investment." "Then, yeah, I guess it is." They ate in silence for a while, watching a heron stalk the shallows on the far side of the lake. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said. "You just did." She almost smiled. "Fair. Can I ask you another thing?" "Depends what it is." "Your wife, how did she die?" Ethan's hand froze halfway to his mouth. He set down the sandwich, appetite gone. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you wear your grief like armor," Vivian said quietly. "And I recognize armor when I see it." Ethan stared at her. No one had said anything like that to him before. Not the counselor, not his friends, not even Claire's parents, who still called once a month to check on Jonah and pretended everything was fine. "Car accident," he said finally. 3 years ago. She was driving home from work, got hit by a drunk driver running a red light. Died before the ambulance got there. Vivian didn't say she was sorry. Didn't offer empty condolences or platitudes. She just nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd already guessed. "And you've been raising your son alone since then?" "Yeah. That's why you don't work weekends." "That's why I don't do a lot of things." Vivian looked down at her hands, turning her mug in slow circles. "Do you regret it? The things you don't do?" Ethan thought about that. The jobs he'd turned down, the dates he'd declined, the life he'd put on hold because forward motion felt like betrayal. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but regret doesn't change anything, it just makes you tired." "That's true." Vivian's voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. "God, that's true." She stood abruptly, picking up her plate. I should let you work. Vivian, she stopped, and Ethan realized it was the first time he'd used her first name. Yeah, she said. Why'd you really buy this house? She looked back at the structure rising behind them, the clean lines, the solid frame, the view that stretched all the way to the mountains. Because I needed a place to disappear, she said. Then she walked inside, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers, and the uncomfortable realization that he was starting to care about the answers. The fourth week, the weather turned. Rain moved in from the west, heavy and cold, the kind that soaked through clothes and made the ground slick. Ethan worked through it as much as he could, but there were limits. Wet lumber didn't fasten right, and the composite decking came with a warning about installation in freezing temperatures. He was packing up early one afternoon, water dripping off the brim of his hat, when Vivian appeared in the doorway. "You're soaked," she said. "Comes with the job." "There are towels inside." "I'm fine." "Ethan." The way she said his name stopped him, firm but not unkind. "Come inside, dry off. I'll make coffee." He almost said no, but his truck was 15 minutes away, and he was cold enough that his hands were shaking. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." The inside of the house was warm and sparse. High ceilings, hardwood floors, furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. Vivian led him to the kitchen and handed him a towel, then started the coffee maker without asking if he wanted any. Ethan dried his face and hair, draping the towel over a chair. "Nice place." "It's too big. You could get a roommate." "I don't like people." "You like me well enough." Vivian paused, mug in hand. "Do I?" "You feed me lunch every day. That's not nothing." She poured the coffee, sliding a cup across the counter to him. "Maybe I'm just making sure you don't quit." "I don't quit jobs." "No," Vivian said slowly. "I don't think you do." They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, steam rising from their mugs, and Ethan had the strangest feeling that they were circling something neither of them wanted to name. "Why'd you disappear?" he asked. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened. "Who says I disappeared?" "You did, the day you told me why you bought the house." She looked down at her coffee. "I used to run a company, big one, made a lot of money, employed a lot of people, and then I found out some of those people were doing things they shouldn't have been doing, illegal things, dangerous things." Her voice was flat, clinical, like she was reading from a report. "I reported it, testified, did everything right, and then the people I trusted most made sure the whole world thought I was the problem." Ethan's stomach dropped. "They set you up. They destroyed me," Vivian corrected. "My reputation, my career, my name. By the time the truth came out, it didn't matter. The damage was done. So I took what was left and I came here. To hide. To survive." Ethan set down his mug. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would make the pain in her voice go away, but he didn't know how. Claire used to be good at that, finding the right words, the right touch. Ethan had always been better with his hands. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think you're hiding." "No? No, I think you're healing. There's a difference." Vivian looked at him for a long time, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm broken." "Everyone's broken," Ethan said. "Some of us are just better at hiding it." The rain hammered against the windows, filling the silence, and for the first time since Claire died, Ethan felt like maybe he wasn't the only one carrying weight he couldn't put down. The deck took shape slowly, board by board, while April slid into May and the mountains turned green. Ethan fell into the rhythm of the work. Measure, cut, fasten, repeat, letting his hands move through motions they'd done 1,000 times, while his mind wandered places it probably shouldn't. He thought about Vivian more than he wanted to admit. The way she stood perfectly still when she was thinking, like she'd forgotten her body was something that needed movement. The way she drank her coffee in the mornings, both hands wrapped around the mug, even when it wasn't cold. The way she looked at him sometimes, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. He told himself it was just curiosity, natural interest in someone who'd hired him, who fed him lunch, who'd started sitting on the finished portion of the deck every afternoon around 1 o'clock with a book she never actually read. But curiosity didn't explain why his pulse kicked up when her car was already in the driveway when he arrived, or why he found himself working slower on Fridays, stretching the day out so he wouldn't have to leave. It had been 3 years since Claire died, and Ethan had convinced himself he was fine being alone, that he didn't need anything beyond what he already had: Jonah, work, the small reliable rhythms of a life built around not wanting too much. But standing on Vivian Hale's half-finished deck, watching the way afternoon light turned the lake silver, he felt something crack open inside him that he'd thought was sealed for good. It scared the hell out of him. On a Tuesday in early May, Jonah asked if he could see where his dad was working. "It's just a construction site," Ethan said, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Nothing special." "But it's on the lake, right? You said it's on the lake." "Yeah." "So can I see it?" Ethan hesitated. He hadn't told Vivian about Jonah beyond the fact that he had a son, and he had no idea how she'd react to a 9-year-old showing up on her property. Some people liked kids. Some people tolerated them. Some people looked at children like they were grenades with the pins already pulled. "I'll ask," Ethan said finally. "When?" "Today." Jonah grinned, shoveling cereal into his mouth fast enough to choke. "Can I bring my fishing rod?" "You don't even know if she'll say yes, but if she does?" Ethan looked at his son, at the hope written all over his face, the kind of uncomplicated excitement that only kids could pull off, and felt his chest tighten. "Yeah," he said. "You can bring your rod." He texted Vivian from the truck before he started the engine, keeping it simple. "My son wants to see the project. Okay if I bring him by sometime?" The response came back almost immediately. "Of course." No questions, no conditions. Just 2 words that somehow made Ethan's throat close up. He picked Jonah up from school that afternoon and drove straight to the lake house, watching his son's face light up when the property came into view. "Whoa," Jonah said, pressing his face against the window. "This place is huge." "Yeah." "Is the lady rich?" "Probably." "Is she nice?" Ethan thought about that. Nice wasn't the right word for Vivian. She was careful, guarded, honest in a way that felt almost brutal sometimes. But she'd never been unkind, not once. "She's fair," Ethan said. Vivian was waiting on the front steps when they pulled up, wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater Ethan hadn't seen before. She stood when they got out of the truck, and Ethan saw her expression shift when she looked at Jonah, not quite a smile, but something softer than her usual careful neutrality. "You must be Jonah," she said. The kid nodded, suddenly shy in a way that never happened at home. "Yes, ma'am." "Your dad's been building me a very nice deck. Would you like to see it?" Yes, please." Vivian led them around the side of the house, and Ethan watched Jonah's eyes go wide when he saw the lake stretched out below them, the half-finished structure cantilevered over the water. "Can I go down there?" Jonah asked. Ethan looked at Vivian, who nodded. "Stay on the finished part," Ethan called as Jonah took off running. And away from the edge, they watched the kid explore, crouching to peer between the boards, testing the railing with careful hands. "He looks like you," Vivian said. "Yeah, he's got his mom's smile, though." "Does he remember her?" "Less every day." Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. "He asked me the other day if that was okay, if it was okay to forget." "What did you tell him?" "That it was. I don't know if I believe it, but I told him anyway." Vivian was quiet for a moment, watching Jonah balance walk along one of the joists like it was a tightrope. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. Cancer. By the time I was Jonah's age, I couldn't remember what her voice sounded like. Just the shape of it, you know? The rhythm. But not the actual sound." Ethan looked at her surprised. Vivian never volunteered information about herself. She answered questions if he asked, but she never offered. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." She folded her arms across her chest, a gesture Ethan had learned meant she was uncomfortable, but trying not to show it. "My father didn't handle it well. He threw himself into work, made a fortune, died of a heart attack when I was 25. Left me everything, the company, the money, the impossible standards." "Is that why you took over?" "I didn't have a choice. He built it for me, whether I wanted it or not. So I ran it, made it bigger, better, proved I could do everything he did and more." Her voice was flat, factual. "And then I lost it all anyway." Jonah called out from the deck, waving both arms. "Dad, can I fish off here when it's done?" "We'll see," Ethan called back. That means yes. Jonah pumped his fist in the air. Vivian almost smiled. He's a good kid. Yeah, he is. Ethan watched his son crouch at the edge of the finish section, dangling his hand toward the water. Better than I deserve, probably. I doubt that. You don't know me well enough to say. Maybe not. Vivian turned to face him, and Ethan felt the full weight of her attention like a spotlight. But I know you show up every day. I know you keep your word. I know you're raising a child who says, yes, ma'am, to strangers and gets excited about fishing. That's not nothing, Ethan. The way she said his name made something shift in his chest. A small movement, tectonic, the kind that starts avalanches if you're not careful. Why do you do that? He asked. Do what? Say things that make me feel like I'm standing on unstable ground. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Because you do the same thing to me. Before Ethan could figure out what to say to that, Jonah came running back, breathless and grinning. Can we come back this weekend, please? I want to fish for real. Ethan looked at Vivian, ready to make excuses, but she spoke first. Saturday, she said. Bring your rod. I'll make sandwiches. Jonah looked at his father, eyes huge with hope, and Ethan knew he'd lost before he even opened his mouth. Okay, he said. Saturday. The days between Tuesday and Saturday felt longer than they should have. Ethan worked on the deck with a focus that bordered on obsessive, trying not to think about the fact that he was looking forward to the weekend in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in years. It wasn't just about Jonah getting to fish. It was about Vivian saying yes without hesitation, about the way she'd looked at his son like he was a person worth knowing, about the crack in her armor that let Ethan see the grief she carried alongside his own. He told himself to be careful, told himself that whatever was building between them was probably just proximity and loneliness. Two people who'd been alone too long, mistaking companionship for something more. But telling himself didn't change the fact that he thought about her at night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would be like to reach across the space between them and see if she reached back. Saturday came bright and clear, the kind of late spring day that made Ethan remember why he'd stayed in Cedar Falls, even when leaving might have been easier. Jonah was up before sunrise, digging through the garage for his tackle box and checking his line for tangles. You're going to scare all the fish away if you don't calm down, Ethan said, loading the truck. I'm calm. You're vibrating. I'm excited. Calm. Ethan shook his head, but he was smiling. He couldn't help it. Jonah's joy was infectious in a way that made the world feel less heavy, even if just for a morning. They drove to the lake house with the windows down, spring air pouring in, and when they pulled up, Vivian was already outside, sitting on the front steps with a cooler beside her. Morning, she said. Morning. Ethan grabbed the fishing gear from the truck bed. You didn't have to go to any trouble. It's sandwiches and lemonade. That's not trouble. Jonah ran ahead to the deck, already casting his line before Ethan could remind him about checking the drag. Vivian stood, lifting the cooler. He's eager, she said. That's one word for it. They walked down together, and Ethan was acutely aware of how close she was. Close enough that he could smell whatever soap or shampoo she used, something clean and faintly citrus. She set the cooler on the finished section of decking and sat down, legs dangling over the water, watching Jonah reel in his line and cast again. You fish? Ethan asked, settling beside her. Not since I was a kid. My dad used to take me sometimes, back before he got too busy. She leaned back on her hands, face tilted toward the sun. I was terrible at it, too impatient. It's not about patience. It's about paying attention. Same thing. Not really. Patience is waiting. Attention is noticing what's happening while you wait. Vivian turned her head to look at him, eyes narrowed against the light. Is that your philosophy on everything? Pretty much. Does it work? Sometimes. Jonah whooped as his line went taut, and Ethan was on his feet before he consciously decided to move, coaching his son through setting the hook and keeping tension on the line. The fish fought hard, probably a bass decent size, and Jonah's whole body shook with effort as he reeled it in. I got it, Dad! I got it! Easy, don't horse it. Let the rod do the work. The fish came up thrashing, silver and green in the sunlight, and Jonah hauled it onto the deck with a yell of triumph. Ethan knelt beside him, helping remove the hook, and when he glanced back at Vivian, she was smiling, a real smile, unguarded and warm. That's a good one, she said. It's huge. Jonah held the fish up for her inspection. Do you think it's big enough to keep? Ethan checked the size. Yeah, if you want, but you have to clean it yourself. Gross. That's the rule. You catch it, you clean it. Jonah made a face, then looked at the fish, then back at his dad. Can we let it go? You sure? Yeah, I just wanted to catch one. They lowered the base back into the water and watched it dart away into the depths. Jonah cast again immediately, and Ethan returned to his spot beside Vivian. You're a good father, she said quietly. I'm trying. That's what makes you good. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. They sat in comfortable silence while Jonah fished, and after a while Vivian opened the cooler and handed out sandwiches. They ate with their feet in the sun and the smell of lake water all around them, and Ethan felt something inside him relax in a way it hadn't in years. Can I ask you something? Vivian said. You keep asking that, and you keep saying yes. Fair point. What is it? She was quiet for a moment, tearing small pieces off her sandwich and dropping them into the water for the minnows. Do you ever think about starting over? She asked. Completely. New place, new life, new everything. Sometimes. Why? Because I can't tell if that's what I'm doing or if I'm just running away. Ethan thought about that, about the difference between escape and reinvention, between hiding and healing. I think it depends on what you're running toward, he said finally. If you're just trying to get away from something, that's running. But if you're moving towards something better, that's starting over. What if you don't know which one it is? Then you wait until you do. Vivian looked at him, and Ethan saw something in her expression he couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. You make it sound simple, she said. It's not, but neither is building a deck, and we're doing that just fine. She laughed, actually laughed, short and sharp and surprised. Did you just compare my existential crisis to home improvement? If the metaphor fits, you're ridiculous. Yeah, well, I work with my hands. Deep thinking isn't really my thing. I don't believe that. Vivian's voice was softer now, serious. I think you're a lot smarter than you pretend to be. Ethan felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. I'm not pretending anything. Yes, you are. You hide behind being just a carpenter, just a dad, just a guy doing his job. But I see you, Ethan, the way you think through problems, the way you notice things, the way you make your son feel like he's the center of the world. She paused. You're not just anything. The words hit him somewhere deep, in a place he'd forgotten existed. No one had said anything like that to him since Claire, and hearing it from Vivian, guarded, careful Vivian who didn't waste words on things she didn't mean, made his throat close up. I don't know what to do with that, he said honestly. You don't have to do anything, I just wanted you to know. Jonah came running over, line tangled around his reel, and the moment broke. Ethan helped fix the snarl while Vivian packed up the remains of lunch, and by the time they left, the sun was high and hot, and the deck was full of water spots from Jonah's wet feet. Can we come back? Jonah asked on the drive home. We'll see. That means yes. That means we'll see. But Jonah was right, and they both knew it. The next week, the weather turned mean. Thunderstorms rolled through every afternoon, turning the construction site into a mud pit and making it impossible to work. Ethan tried to stay productive, catching up on other jobs in town, but he found himself checking his phone more than he should, looking for messages from Vivian that never came. On Thursday, she finally texted, Can you come by tomorrow? Even if you can't work. I want to show you something. Ethan stared at the message for longer than was reasonable, trying to decode what it meant. Finally, he just typed back, Yeah. What time? Anytime. He showed up at 10, earlier than usual, and found Vivian's car gone. For a second, he thought maybe he'd misunderstood, but then he saw the note taped to the front door. Went to town. Let yourself in. There's coffee. Let yourself in. Like it was normal. Like they were past the point of formality. Ethan opened the door, unlocked, which would have made him nervous if this was anywhere but Cedar Falls, and stepped inside. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and he felt like an intruder even though she'd explicitly told him to come in. The coffee was where she said it would be, a full pot staying warm on the counter. Ethan poured himself a cup and stood in the kitchen, looking around at the space Vivian had made for herself. It was cleaner than when he'd been here during the rainstorm, Books on the shelves now, a blanket draped over the couch, a pair of sneakers by the door. Small signs that someone actually lived here instead of just hiding. He was still standing there when he heard her car pull up. Vivian came through the door carrying grocery bags and stopped short when she saw him. "You came," she said. "You asked." "I know, She set the bags on the counter. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" She didn't answer, just started unpacking groceries with quick, efficient movements. Ethan watched her for a moment, then moved to help. "What did you want to show me?" he asked. "It's upstairs. But first I need to tell you something." The shift in her tone made Ethan's stomach drop. "Okay." Vivian stopped unpacking and turned to face him, arms crossed. The defensive posture. "There are people looking for me," she said. "The ones I testified against. They've been quiet for months, but last week I got a message. Indirect, through a lawyer. They want me to recant my testimony." Jesus, can they do that? No. But they can make my life hell trying. She looked down at her hands. "I need you to know that, because if you keep working here, if you keep bringing Jonah here, there's a chance it could get complicated, messy. I won't blame you if you want to walk away." Ethan set down the can he'd been holding. "Is that what you want, for me to walk away?" "No." The word came out fast, almost desperate. "No, I don't. But I also don't want to drag you into something you didn't sign up for." "Vivian." He waited until she looked at him. "I'm a grown man. I can decide what I'm willing to deal with. And unless you're asking me to leave, I'm not going anywhere." "Why?" "Because you're my friend, and friends don't bail when things get hard." Something in her expression cracked. Relief, maybe, or disbelief that someone would actually mean that. "Come on," she said quietly. "I'll show you what I wanted you to see." She led him upstairs to a room at the end of the hall, and when she opened the door, Ethan's breath caught. It was an office, but not like any office he'd ever seen. One wall was floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Another was covered in whiteboards filled with notes, diagrams, timelines written in Vivian's precise handwriting. The third wall was documents, printouts, photos, what looked like legal filings, all arranged in careful rows. "This is everything," Vivian said. "Every piece of evidence I gave to the prosecutors, every connection I traced, every lie I uncovered." She walked to the center of the room, arms still crossed. "I keep thinking if I look at it enough, I'll find something I missed. Some way to end this for good." Ethan moved closer to the wall of documents, reading without really processing. Names he didn't recognize, companies he'd never heard of, dollar amounts that made his head spin. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "Since I got here, 5 months." "Vivian, I know it's obsessive. I know I should let it go. But every time I try, I think about what they did, the people they hurt, the lives they destroyed while I was too busy running the company to pay attention." Her voice cracked. "I was supposed to protect them. That was my job. And I failed." Ethan turned away from the wall and looked at her. Really looked. She was shaking again, the way she had that first day on the deck, and he realized this wasn't just about justice or revenge or clearing her name. This was about guilt, the kind that ate you alive from the inside. "You didn't fail," he said. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do, because you're still fighting. Failure is giving up. You haven't done that." Vivian shook her head, and Ethan saw tears on her face, the first time he'd seen her cry. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. "I don't know how to just be okay with what happened." Ethan closed the distance between them before he could think better of it and pulled her into a hug. She went rigid for half a second, then collapsed against him, shaking harder now, crying into his shoulder with the kind of desperate, ugly sobs that came from holding too much in for too long. He didn't say anything, didn't tell her it would be okay, or that everything would work out. He just held her, one hand on her back, and let her break in a way she probably hadn't let herself break since this whole nightmare started. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, and she looked more human than she ever had. "Sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "Don't be. I don't usually—" "I know." She laughed, shaky and raw. "You're taking this really well. My wife died in my arms," Ethan said quietly. "I held her while she bled out on the side of the road, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. So yeah, I know what it's like to carry something that doesn't fit anywhere. And I know what it's like to need someone to just hold on when everything else is falling apart. Vivian stared at him, and Ethan saw the exact moment she understood what he was really saying. That this wasn't just sympathy. This was recognition. Two people who'd survived things they shouldn't have survived, standing in a room full of evidence that the world was cruel and unfair and completely indifferent to suffering. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm fragile." "You're not fragile, you're just carrying too much." "Isn't that the same thing?" "No. Fragile breaks, you're still standing." Vivian looked at the walls around them, at the evidence of everything she'd lost and everything she was still fighting for, and then back at Ethan. "Will you help me?" she asked. "Help you how?" "I don't know yet, but I can't do this alone anymore, and you're the only person I trust." Ethan should have said no, should have remembered that he had a son to think about, a life to protect, a carefully constructed routine that kept him safe from exactly this kind of complication. But when he looked at Vivian, at the hope and fear and desperate courage written all over her face, he couldn't do it. "Yeah," he said, "I'll help you." And just like that, everything changed. Helping Vivian turned out to mean spending 3 nights a week at the lake house after Jonah went to bed, sitting at her kitchen table while she walked him through the labyrinth of corporate malfeasance that had destroyed her life. Ethan wasn't a lawyer or an investigator or anything close to qualified for this kind of work, but Vivian said that was exactly why she needed him. "Everyone else I know thinks like they do," she explained, spreading documents across the table between coffee mugs and half-eaten takeout. "They see the patterns I see, make the same connections. But you look at things differently. You solve problems with your hands. That's a different kind of logic." "I fix decks," Ethan said. "I don't know anything about shell corporations or offshore accounts." "You don't need to. Just tell me what doesn't make sense." So he did. And somewhere between explaining ledger discrepancies and tracing money transfers through 3 different countries, Ethan realized he was actually understanding it. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to see how Vivian's former business partner had siphoned millions through fake vendor contracts. Enough to understand why the prosecutors had believed her testimony. Enough to know that the people threatening her now weren't just covering their own asses. They were terrified she'd find something else. "There's more, isn't there?" Ethan asked one night, pushing back from the table to stretch. It was nearly midnight, and his back ached from hunching over papers for 3 hours. Vivian looked up from the laptop where she'd been cross-referencing bank statements. "More what?" "More evidence. Something you haven't found yet. That's why they're still coming after you." She was quiet for a long moment, then closed the laptop. "I think so," she said. "The prosecution's case was solid, but it only covered about 60% of the money I flagged. The rest just disappeared. No trail, no explanation, like someone wiped it clean before I could trace it." "Could they do that?" "If they knew I was looking, yeah, absolutely." She rubbed her eyes, and Ethan noticed the dark circles that had been getting worse. "I keep thinking if I could find where that other 40% went, I'd have leverage, real leverage. Not just testimony, but proof they can't explain away." "And then what?" "Then they leave me alone. Or they go to prison. I'm flexible on which." Ethan stood, moving to the kitchen to refill their coffee mugs. Outside, the lake was black glass under a half moon, perfectly still. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." "Why does it matter so much? You already won. They were convicted. You got out. Why keep fighting?" Vivian came to stand beside him at the window, accepting the mug he handed her. "Because winning the case didn't undo what they did," she said quietly. "People lost their jobs, their pensions. Some of them lost everything because they trusted a company I was supposed to be running. And when it all came out, half the world blamed me anyway. Said I must have known, must have been complicit." She took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the temperature. "I can't fix what happened to them, but I can make sure the people responsible don't get to walk away with millions in stolen money and a slap on the wrist." "Oh, Botsi, that's not your responsibility." "Maybe not, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore." Ethan understood that. The need to do something, anything, to counteract the unfairness of the world. He'd felt the same way after Claire died, working himself into exhaustion on jobs he didn't need, building things just to prove he still could, filling every hour so he wouldn't have to sit still with the reality that his wife was gone, and nothing he did would bring her back. You're going to burn out, he said. I know. Vivian, I know, Ethan, but I don't know how to stop. He set down his mug and turned to face her fully. Then let me help you figure it out. That's what we're doing. No, we're feeding your obsession. That's different. He kept his voice gentle but firm. You can't live like this. Up all night, barely eating, treating this house like it's just a base camp for your investigation instead of a place you actually live. It is just a base camp. That's my point. Vivian's jaw tightened. What do you want me to do? Pretend everything's fine? Throw dinner parties and go for morning jogs and act like I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop? I want you to sleep more than 4 hours a night. I want you to eat real food instead of whatever you can grab between research spirals. I want you to sit on that deck we've been building and actually enjoy the view you supposedly bought this house for. I can't. Why not? Because if I stop moving, if I let my guard down for even a second, they'll find a way in. They'll find something I missed, some angle I didn't cover, and it'll all fall apart. Her hands were shaking again, coffee sloshing in the mug. I can't let that happen. Ethan took the mug from her before she spilled it and set it on the counter. Then he did something he'd been thinking about for weeks but hadn't had the courage to act on. He reached out and took her hand. Listen to me, he said. You're not alone in this anymore. You asked for my help and I said yes. That means when you're too tired to think straight, I'll keep thinking. When you miss something, I'll catch it. You don't have to carry all of it by yourself. Vivian stared at their joined hands like she couldn't quite process what was happening. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know me. That's not true. We've known each other 2 months. Yeah, and I've spent almost every day with you. I know you drink your coffee black and can't cook anything except soup. I know you read the same page of whatever book you're pretending to read about 6 times because you're not actually paying attention. I know you don't sleep because you're afraid of nightmares. I know you stand on that deck when you think no one's watching and you look at the water like you're trying to decide if it would be easier to just disappear into it. Vivian's breath hitched. Ethan, I know you, he said again. Maybe not everything, but enough to know you're drowning and you won't ask for help. So I'm not asking, I'm telling you, let me help. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, her fingers tightened around his. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay. It wasn't a promise, wasn't even really an agreement, but it was something, and right now, something felt like enough. The deck was finished by the first week of June. Ethan spent a Saturday applying the final coat of sealant while Jonah helped, or tried to help, mostly just managing to get sealant on his shoes and arms. Vivian watched from the kitchen window, and when Ethan caught her eye, she raised her coffee mug in a small salute. Is that her? Jonah asked, following his dad's gaze. Yeah, she's pretty. Jonah, what? She is. And she's nice. She let me fish off her dock. Deck. It's a deck. Whatever. Jonah dragged the brush along a board with more enthusiasm than technique. Do you like her? Ethan's hand stilled. What kind of question is that? A normal one. Do you? She's my employer. That's not what I asked. Ethan looked at his son, 9 years old and already too perceptive for his own good. A new line would only make it worse. Yeah, he said, I like her. Like her? I don't know. Maybe. Jonah grinned, that crooked smile that was pure Claire. Good. You should. Oh yeah? Why's that? Because you're happy when you're here. Happier than normal. And I think she's happy when you're here too. Ethan's throat tightened. You think so? I know so. I'm not stupid, Dad. Never said you were, Bud. They finished the sealant in silence, and when Vivian came out to inspect the work, Jonah announced that it was perfect, and they should have a party to celebrate. A party? Vivian looked uncertain. Yeah, like a deck warming. That's a thing, right? I think you're thinking of housewarming, Ethan said. Same difference. We should do it. Jonah turned to Vivian using the full force of his 9-year-old charm. Please, I'll bring chips. Vivian glanced at Ethan, and he could see her calculating, weighing the risk of letting people get close against the impossibility of disappointing a kid who was looking at her like she hung the moon. Okay, she said finally, but just us. No crowds. Deal. Jonah stuck out his hand, and Vivian shook it with the same seriousness she'd probably used in boardroom negotiations. The party happened the following Saturday, and it was the most low-key celebration Ethan had ever attended. Just the three of them, sitting on the finished deck with a cooler full of drinks and a spread of food Vivian had ordered from the diner in town. Jonah caught 2 more bass and released them both, and Vivian taught him how to tie an improved clinch knot that actually held. "Where'd you learn that?" Ethan asked. "My dad, before he decided fishing was a waste of time." Sounds like he was wrong about a lot of things. Yeah. Vivian watched Jonah cast again, the line arcing perfect over the water. He was. They stayed until the sun started to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink that looked fake, too beautiful to be real. Jonah fell asleep on the drive home, and Ethan carried him inside and tucked him in, still smelling like lake water and sunscreen. When he came back downstairs, his phone was buzzing. A text from Vivian. "Thank you for today." He typed back, "You paid for the food. I should be thanking you. Not for the food, for letting me be part of something normal." Ethan stared at the message, reading it 3 times before he understood what she was really saying. That she'd been alone so long, normal had started to feel like a foreign country she'd never get a passport to. "You're always part of it," he typed. "If you want to be." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I want to be." That night, lying in bed, Ethan let himself admit what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for Vivian Hale. Maybe had already fallen. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming thing he'd felt with Claire when they were 22 and stupid. This was quieter, more deliberate, the kind of feeling that grew in the spaces between words, in shared silences and small gestures, and the weight of someone's trust when they had every reason not to trust anyone. It scared him. But not as much as the alternative. The message from Vivian's lawyers came on a Tuesday morning in late June. Ethan was at the house, helping her reorganize the evidence wall in her office, a task she'd finally admitted needed doing after months of adding things in no particular order, when her phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, then went pale. "When?" she asked. Then, "How much?" Then, "I'll call you back." She hung up and sat down hard in the desk chair. "What happened?" Ethan asked. "They filed a civil suit. My former partners. They're claiming I defamed them during the trial, damaged their reputations, cost them business opportunities." Her voice was flat, automatic. "They're suing me for $30 million. Can they do that?" "Apparently." She laughed, but it came out broken. "My lawyer says it's retaliation. A slap suit. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They don't expect to win. They just want to drain my resources, force me to spend money on legal fees, make me regret speaking up." Ethan felt anger flash hot in his chest. "That's insane. That's legal." Vivian pressed her palms against her eyes. "I knew they'd try something. I just didn't think it would be this." "What are you going to do?" "Fight it. What else can I do? If I back down now, they win. They get to rewrite history, make themselves the victims, and I get to be the villain who destroyed innocent people's lives." She dropped her hands, and Ethan saw fury in her eyes alongside the fear. "I won't let that happen." "How long will it take?" "Months, maybe a year. Depends on how aggressive they are, how many motions they file, how much they want to drag this out. And in the meantime, I keep doing what I'm doing, looking for that missing money, building a case so airtight they can't wriggle out of it." She stood, pacing to the window. "But Ethan, you need to know this changes things. These people are serious. They're not going to stop at a lawsuit. They'll dig into anyone connected to me. And if they find out you've been helping me, let them find out." "Ethan, I mean it." He moved to stand beside her. "You think I'm going to bail because some corporate assholes filed paperwork? That's not how this works. You have a son. I know. And part of being a good father is showing him that you don't run when things get hard. You stand up for people who matter." Vivian turned to look at him, and Ethan saw tears on her face again. But these were different. Not despair. Something closer to disbelief. "I matter?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, you matter." She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't tentative, wasn't anything like Ethan had imagined it might be during the countless times he'd thought about this exact moment. Vivian just stepped into his space and kissed him like it was the only thing that made sense, and Ethan's brain went offline for 3 full seconds before he kissed her back. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Sorry," Vivian said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize." "But, Vivian, don't." She searched his face, looking for something, doubt maybe, or regret. When she didn't find it, she kissed him again, slower this time, and Ethan let himself fall into it. Let himself want this without guilt or fear or any of the 1,000 reasons he'd been telling himself it was a bad idea. When they finally pulled apart for real, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "This is a terrible idea," she murmured. "Probably. I'm a mess. My life is a mess. You deserve better than this. I'm a widower raising a kid on a carpenter's salary. I'm not exactly a prize either. You're perfect. I'm really not." Vivian pulled back far enough to look at him. "You show up. You keep your word. You make your son feel loved. You make me feel like maybe I'm not completely broken. That's as close to perfect as anyone gets." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears still clinging to her cheeks. "You're not broken," he said. "You're surviving. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah. Broken things don't fight back. You're still swinging." She laughed, shaky and wet, and kissed him one more time before stepping back. "I need to call my lawyer," she said. "Figure out what comes next." "Okay." "And Ethan?" She paused in the doorway. "Thank you for not running. I'm not going anywhere." After she left, Ethan stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the deck they'd built together. Solid, level, strong enough to hold whatever weight was put on it. He thought about Vivian's question from weeks ago, whether starting over was the same as running away, and realized the answer depended entirely on what you built in the new place. She wasn't running. Neither was he. They were building something, and maybe that was enough. The lawsuit consumed the next 3 weeks. Vivian spent hours on the phone with lawyers, drafting responses, compiling evidence to support her countersuit. Ethan helped where he could, which mostly meant keeping her fed and reminding her to sleep. They didn't talk about the kiss, didn't talk about what it meant or where this was going. There wasn't time, but things had shifted anyway. Small touches that lasted longer than necessary, looks that carried weight. The way Vivian said his name now, like it meant something more than just an identifier. Jonah noticed, of course. Kids always did. "Are you dating her?" he asked one night at dinner. Ethan nearly choked on his pasta. "What?" "Vivian, are you dating her?" "We're friends." "Friends who kiss?" How do you know about that?" Jonah rolled his eyes. "I'm 9, not stupid. You're happy all the time now, and you check your phone like every 5 seconds to see if she texted. That's dating behavior." Ethan set down his fork. "Would it bother you if I was dating her?" His son thought about that, chewing slowly. "No," he said finally. "I like her. She's smart, and she doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." He paused. "Is she going to be like my stepmom or something?" "Whoa. We're just figuring things out, okay?" "Okay. But if you do start dating for real, you should tell her you like her. Girls appreciate that kind of thing." "Oh yeah? Where'd you learn that? TV?" "Great. I'm taking relationship advice from a 9-year-old who gets his wisdom from cartoons. You should listen to me. I'm very wise." Ethan threw a napkin at him, and Jonah dissolved into giggles. But later that night, after Jonah was asleep, Ethan found himself thinking about what his son had said, about being happy, about checking his phone, about the fact that for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward instead of just surviving day to day. He texted Vivian, "You awake?" The reply came immediately. "Unfortunately, yes." "Why? Can I come over?" "Now?" "Yeah." The 3 dots appeared for a long time before her response came through. "Yes." Ethan grabbed his keys. The drive to the lake house took 15 minutes, and Ethan spent the entire time trying to figure out what he was going to say. He still didn't have it figured out when he pulled into her driveway and saw her standing on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket. "It's almost midnight," she said when he got out of the truck. "I know. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, He stopped, suddenly feeling ridiculous. "I wanted to see you." Vivian's expression softened. You drove all the way out here because you wanted to see me? Yeah. Ethan, I know it's stupid. I just couldn't stop thinking about you, and I figured maybe you were up anyway because you never sleep. And she kissed him. It was softer than before, less urgent, and when she pulled back, she was smiling. You're an idiot, she said. I know. A sweet idiot. I'll take it. She grabbed his hand and pulled him inside, and they ended up on the couch with mugs of tea neither of them drank, talking until 3 in the morning about nothing important. Favorite movies. Worst first dates. The kinds of things you share when you're trying to learn someone from the inside out. I haven't done this in a long time, Vivian said at some point, head resting on his shoulder. Done what? Just existed with someone. No agenda, no performance, just being. Is it weird? Terrifying. But good? She tilted her head to look at him. Yeah, good. Ethan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling her heartbeat against his ribs. I should go, he said eventually. Jonah's alone. I know. But neither of them moved. Finally, reluctantly, Ethan extracted himself and stood. Vivian walked him to the door, still wrapped in her blanket. Ethan, she said as he reached the porch. Yeah? I'm glad you came over. Me too. Even if it was stupid, especially because it was stupid. He drove home with the windows down and the radio off, and when he slipped back into the house, Jonah was standing at the top of the stairs in his pajamas. You went to see her, the kid said. Not a question. Yeah. Is it official now? I don't know, maybe, Jonah grinned. Cool. Can I go back to bed now? Yeah, bud, go to bed. Go to eat. Ethan lay awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the fact that his son had just given him permission to move on, permission he hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. Claire would have liked Vivian, he thought. She would have appreciated her bluntness, her refusal to pretend things were fine when they weren't, her stubborn determination to keep fighting even when the odds were stacked against her. And maybe that was okay. Maybe loving someone new didn't erase the person you'd loved before. Maybe it just meant your heart was bigger than you'd thought, big enough to hold grief and hope at the same time. The next morning, Ethan woke up to a text from Vivian, 3 words that made his chest tight in the best possible way. Come over tonight, he typed back immediately. Yeah, I'll be there. And he was. July came hot and relentless, turning the lake into bathwater and making even the simplest tasks feel like wading through honey. Ethan started showing up at Vivian's house earlier in the mornings, before the heat became unbearable, and staying later into the evenings when the temperature finally broke. Jonah came with him more often now, swimming off the deck, while his father and Vivian sat in the shade going through documents, the kids' laughter punctuating their conversations about wire transfers and shell corporations. It felt normal, dangerously normal, like they were a family instead of 3 people who'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident and decided to stay. But underneath the normalcy, tension was building. The lawsuit was moving forward, depositions scheduled for August, and Vivian's lawyers were getting more urgent in their requests for additional evidence. The missing 40% of the money had become an obsession again, consuming her nights and bleeding into her days, until Ethan could see exhaustion written in every line of her body. You need to sleep, he said one evening, finding her still at the kitchen table at 11 p.m., surrounded by printouts and highlighters. I will. Just let me finish this. You said that 2 hours ago. And I meant it 2 hours ago. Things changed. She didn't look up from the document she was reading, yellow marker poised over a paragraph. I found something, a transfer from one of the subsidiary accounts to a company I don't recognize. If I can trace it, Vivian. Ethan took the highlighter out of her hand. It'll still be here in the morning. I know, but what if I lose the thread? What if I can't find it again? Then we'll find it together, tomorrow, when you're not half asleep and making mistakes. She finally looked at him, and he saw the desperation there, the fear that if she stopped moving, stopped searching, everything would collapse. I can't lose this, she said quietly. This lawsuit, the case, all of it. It's the only thing I have left. That's not true. Isn't it? I don't have a career. I don't have friends. I don't have... You have me. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat across from her. You have Jonah. You have this house, this life you're building. That's not nothing, Vivian. It feels like nothing when I'm lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering if they're going to win. If all of this was for nothing. They're not going to win. You can't know that. Yeah, I can. Because you're smarter than them, more stubborn than them, and you've got the truth on your side. That counts for something. Vivian shook her head, but she was almost smiling. You have a lot of faith in justice for someone who lost his wife to a drunk driver who got 6 months in probation. The words landed like a punch. Ethan sat back, feeling the air leave his lungs. I'm sorry, Vivian said immediately. That was cruel. I shouldn't have... No, you're right. Ethan looked down at his hands, remembering the sentencing hearing, the way the defense attorney had painted the driver as a victim of his own addiction, a good man who'd made one terrible mistake. The system's broken. I know that. But what else do we have? I don't know. Exactly. So we work with what we've got and hope it's enough. He reached across the table and took her hand. But you can't do it alone. You'll burn out before you ever get there. Vivian's fingers tightened around his. I don't know how to stop. I know. That's why I'm here. They sat like that for a while, hands linked across a table covered in evidence of everything wrong with the world, until finally Vivian stood and started gathering papers. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. We'll look at it tomorrow. Good. She turned off the lights, and they walked upstairs together, something that had become routine over the past few weeks, though they still hadn't talked about what it meant that Ethan was sleeping over more nights than not. They'd fallen into it gradually, like everything else between them. A kiss goodnight that lasted too long. A conversation that stretched past midnight. The unspoken agreement that neither of them wanted to be alone. In the bedroom, Vivian changed into an old t-shirt while Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. The intimacy of it still felt strange sometimes. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. Like learning a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Can I ask you something? Vivian said, settling beside him. Yeah. Do you ever feel guilty about this? Us. Ethan thought about that. About Claire. About the promises they'd made to each other. About the life they'd planned that would never happen. Sometimes, he admitted. Not because I think I'm doing anything wrong, just because it feels like I'm leaving her behind. Are you? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally letting myself be someone other than the guy whose wife died. He looked at Vivian. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. She pulled her knees up to her chest, arms wrapped around them. I feel guilty too. Not about you. About being happy when so many people lost everything because of what happened at my company. Like I don't deserve to build a new life when theirs were destroyed. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I was in charge. I should have seen it sooner, done something before it got so bad. You did do something. You testified. You exposed them. You're still fighting to make it right. But it's not enough. It never feels like enough. Ethan pulled her close, and she came willingly, head on his chest. But you're doing everything you can. That's all anyone can do. They lay in the dark, listening to the lake lap against the shore and the occasional call of an owl in the pines. Ethan felt Vivian's breathing slow and even out, her body relaxing against his, and he thought about how strange it was that two people could find each other in the wreckage of their own separate disasters and somehow make something that felt like hope. He was almost asleep when Vivian spoke again. Ethan? I love you. The words hung in the darkness, simple and terrifying and absolutely true. Ethan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He'd known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that they were heading here, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that scared him more than he wanted to admit. You don't have to say it back, Vivian said quickly. I just needed to tell you. I needed you to know. I love you too, Ethan said. And the moment the words left his mouth, he knew they were true. Not the same way he'd loved Claire, that had been young and fierce and all-consuming, built on shared history and dreams of forever. This was different, quieter, built on understanding and choice and the decision to keep showing up even when things got hard. Vivian lifted her head to look at him, and even in the dark he could see tears on her face. Really? Really. She kissed him, salt and sweetness, and Ethan kissed her back with everything he had. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's histories, with patience and attention and the understanding that some scars ran too deep to ever fully heal. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled like lake water in summer, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. "I'm glad you answered the phone," Vivian murmured against his shoulder. "What?" "That night I called you. I'm glad you answered." "Me too." Even knowing everything that came after? Especially knowing everything that came after. She fell asleep like that, curled against him, and Ethan lay awake watching the moonlight move across the ceiling and thinking about the fact that he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. For the first time in 3 years. It wouldn't last. He knew that. The lawsuit was still looming, Vivian's past was still hunting her, and real life had a way of crushing good things under its boot heel. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The storm came 3 days later. Not a weather storm, though the sky had been threatening rain all afternoon, clouds piling up over the mountains in dark towers. This storm was worse. Ethan was at the house with Jonah, the kid fishing off the deck while Ethan helped Vivian install shelves in her office. When her phone rang, she glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's my lawyer," she said. "Answer it." She did, stepping out into the hall. Ethan could hear her voice through the door, short, clipped responses that gave nothing away. When she came back, her hands were shaking. "They found something," she said. "The missing money?" "No, something else." She sat down hard in the desk chair. "My former business partner, Marcus Chen. He's claiming I falsified evidence during the trial, says I manufactured documents to support my testimony. He's filed a motion to have the original verdict overturned." Ethan felt ice slide down his spine. Can he do that? If he can prove it? Yeah, absolutely. Vivian pressed her palms against her eyes. But I didn't falsify anything. Every document I submitted was real, verified, authenticated by forensic accountants. There's no way. Then it's bullshit. They're making it up. Of course they're making it up. But that doesn't matter if they can make it look credible. If they can create enough doubt, the whole case falls apart. The convictions get overturned, the civil suit goes forward, and Her voice broke. I lose everything. Vivian, you need to leave. Ethan blinked. What? You and Jonah. You need to leave. Now. Before this gets worse. She stood, already moving toward the door. I can't have you connected to this. If they dig into my life and find out you've been helping me, they'll go after you too. They'll claim you're complicit, that you helped me fabricate evidence. I won't let that happen. That's insane. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Vivian turned to face him, and Ethan saw terror in her eyes, raw and absolute. I knew this was a mistake. Getting close to you, involving you in this mess, I should have kept my distance, should have handled it alone. You don't mean that. I do. I have to. She was crying now, but her voice was steady. Please, Ethan, just go. Take Jonah and go, and forget you ever knew me. I can't do that. Why not? Because I love you, and you don't get to decide for both of us that it's over. I'm trying to protect you. By pushing me away, that's not protection. That's fear. Vivian flinched like he'd slapped her. Of course I'm afraid. These people destroyed my life once already. They'll do it again if I give them the chance. And now they're threatening to take away the one thing I accomplished, getting them convicted. If that goes away, what was the point? Why did I sacrifice everything if it all just disappears? It won't disappear. We'll fight it. We? There is no we. You're a carpenter, Ethan. You fix things. You can't fix this. The words hit harder than anything she could have said. Ethan stood there feeling like the ground had opened up beneath him and realized this was what real fear looked like. Not the kind that made you run. The kind that made you destroy everything good in your life before someone else could do it for you. You're right, he said quietly. I can't fix this. I can't make your lawsuit go away or find your missing money or undo what happened to you. But I can stand next to you while you fight it. I can remind you that you're not alone. That's not nothing, Vivian. It's not enough. Maybe not. But it's what I've got. She shook her head, backing toward the door. I can't do this. I can't let you throw your life away for me. That's not your choice to make. Yes, it is. This is my fight, not yours. Then why did you ask for my help? The question stopped her cold. I don't know, she said finally. I think I was lonely. I think I wanted to believe someone could care about me without wanting something in return, but that was selfish. And now I need to fix it. By destroying what we have? By keeping you safe. I don't want to be safe. I want to be with you. Vivian's face crumpled, but she didn't move toward him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But you need to go. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to grab her and make her see that running wouldn't solve anything, that fear was a worse enemy than any lawsuit. But he could see in her eyes that she'd already made up her mind. She'd built walls around herself again, reinforced them with panic and guilt, and no amount of words would break through. Okay, he said. I'll go. But this isn't over, Vivian. I'm not giving up on you. You should. Yeah, well, I'm not great at doing what I should. He walked out of the office, down the stairs, and out to the deck where Jonah was still fishing, oblivious to the world imploding around them. We're leaving, bud, Ethan said. Already? But I just got a bite. Now, Jonah. Something in his father's voice made the kid reel in his line without argument. They packed up in silence, and Ethan kept waiting for Vivian to come outside, to change her mind, to realize what she was throwing away. But she didn't. The drive home was quiet. Jonah kept glancing at his father, clearly wanting to ask what happened, but smart enough not to push. Finally, as they pulled into the driveway, he spoke. Did you guys break up? Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't know. But you love her. Yeah. And she loves you, right? I think so. Then why? Because sometimes loving someone isn't enough. Ethan killed the engine and sat there, staring at his own front door. Sometimes people are too scared to let themselves be happy. That's stupid. Yeah, bud, it is. They went inside and Ethan made dinner on autopilot. Spaghetti again, because it was easy and he couldn't think straight enough to do anything complicated. Jonah picked at his food and Ethan didn't eat at all. You're going to fix it, right? Jonah asked eventually. I don't know if I can. You have to try. What if she doesn't want me to? Then you try anyway. That's what you're always telling me. Don't give up just because something's hard. Ethan looked at his son, 9 years old and already wiser than he had any right to be, and felt his throat close. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always listen. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. Fair enough. That night, he lay in bed and stared at his phone, reading and rereading the last text Vivian had sent him. It was from 2 days ago, before everything went to hell. Just 3 words. Thinking about you. He typed out a dozen different messages and deleted them all. What was there to say? I'm not giving up felt too aggressive. I love you felt too simple. I understand felt like a lie. Finally, he just wrote, I'm here when you're ready. He hit send before he could second guess it, then turned off his phone and tried to sleep. He failed. The next morning, Ethan woke up to find Jonah sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. What are you doing? Ethan asked, pouring coffee. Research. On what? Vivian's case. I Googled her last name and found a bunch of articles about the trial. Jonah looked up, and Ethan saw determination on his face. Dad, these people are really bad. Like, really bad. They stole money from thousands of people. I know. So we have to help her. Jonah, I'm serious. She's trying to do the right thing, and they're attacking her for it. That's not fair. Life's not fair, bud. I know that. But that doesn't mean we just give up. Jonah stood, crossing his arms in a gesture so reminiscent of his mother that Ethan's chest ached. You always tell me to stand up for what's right. Well, this is right. Helping Vivian is right. So we need to do it. Ethan sat down heavily. It's not that simple. Why not? Because she doesn't want my help. She told me to leave, told me to stay away. Do you always do what people tell you? When they're trying to protect me? Yeah. But who's protecting her? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating, and Ethan realized his 9-year-old son had just cut straight to the heart of it. Vivian had spent months fighting alone, years probably, building walls around herself because everyone she'd trusted had either betrayed her or abandoned her. And now, when she finally had someone who refused to leave, she was pushing him away because she didn't know how to let anyone inside those walls. You're right, Ethan said. I know. Don't get cocky. Too late. Ethan grabbed his keys. Stay here. I'll be back. Where are you going? To do something stupid. The drive to the lake house felt longer than usual, every mile giving Ethan more time to second guess what he was about to do. Vivian had been clear. She wanted him gone, wanted him safe, wanted to handle this alone. But Jonah was right. She'd been alone long enough. Vivian's car was in the driveway when he arrived, but she didn't come out when he pulled up. Ethan sat in his truck for a moment, gathering courage, then got out and walked to the front door. It was locked. He knocked. No answer. Vivian, I know you're in there. Nothing. I'm not leaving. You can ignore me all day if you want, but I'm not going anywhere. The door opened. Vivian stood there in the same clothes she'd been wearing yesterday, hair unwashed, eyes red from crying. I told you to leave, she said. I know. So why are you here? Because my 9-year-old son reminded me that sometimes you don't give up on people just because they tell you to. Vivian's expression cracked, just for a second, before she reinforced it. This isn't a game, Ethan. These people are dangerous. They've already filed false motions. Who knows what they'll do next? Then we deal with it, together. You keep saying that, but you don't understand what you're signing up for. So explain it to me. I just did. No, you told me about the lawsuit, the accusations, the threats. But you haven't told me the real reason you're pushing me away. Ethan took a step closer. What are you actually afraid of, Vivian? She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her walls crack, crumble, finally collapse. I'm afraid you'll see who I really am, she whispered, and you'll realize I'm not worth it. The words gutted him. Ethan closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him. You're worth it, he said into her hair. You're worth every bit of this mess, every sleepless night, every hour spent digging through documents, every risk. He pulled back far enough to look at her. You're worth fighting for, Vivian, and I'm not going to stop fighting just because you're too scared to believe that. She was crying now, full-body sobs that shook both of them. I don't know how to let you in, she said. I don't know how to trust that you won't leave. I can't promise I won't screw up. I can't promise everything will be okay. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere, no matter how hard you push. Even if they come after you. Even then. Even if I can't fix this? Especially then. Vivian kissed him, desperate and grateful and terrified, and Ethan kissed her back with everything he had. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I'm sorry, she said. For yesterday. For trying to, don't. I get it. Fear makes people do stupid things. I did plenty of stupid things after Claire died. Like what? Like convince myself I was better off alone. That needing people made me weak. That if I just worked hard enough, I could outrun grief. He brushed hair out of her face. Turns out you can't outrun anything. You just get tired. So what do you do instead? You stop running. You turn around and face it, and you let people help carry the weight. Vivian nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Okay. Okay, I'll stop pushing you away. I'll let you help. I'll try to believe that this, us, is real, and not just something that's going to blow up in my face. It's real, Ethan said. I promise you, it's real. They stood there in the doorway, holding each other while the sky finally opened up and rain poured down in sheets, washing the dust from the deck and turning the lake silver. And for the first time since the storm started, Ethan thought maybe they'd actually survive it. They spent the rest of that rainy afternoon at Vivian's kitchen table, going through every document related to the falsification claims with methodical precision. Ethan made coffee while Vivian explained the technical details, her voice steadier now that she wasn't carrying the weight alone. The claims were elaborate. Marcus Chen's lawyers had compiled a 70-page brief alleging that 3 specific documents Vivian had submitted during the original trial had been altered after the fact, their metadata manipulated to hide the changes. But that's impossible, Vivian said, pointing to the authentication reports from the forensic accountants. These were verified by independent experts, multiple experts. There's a whole chain of custody. So what are they claiming? That you bribed the experts? Essentially, yes. They're saying I had the resources and the motive to fabricate evidence, and that the experts either missed it or were complicit. She rubbed her eyes. It's insane, but it's just plausible enough to create doubt. And doubt is all they need. Ethan studied the documents, trying to see what he was missing. He wasn't a forensic accountant or a lawyer, but he understood structure, the way things fit together or didn't. And something about the timeline bothered him. When did you first flag these transactions? He asked, pointing to one of the disputed documents. March 2023, about 8 months before I testified. And when were they authenticated? June 2023. Why? Because Chen's brief says you altered them in August 2023, after authentication but before trial. Ethan tapped the page. But if they were already authenticated, wouldn't any changes show up in the metadata comparison? Vivian went very still. Yes, they would. Unless... She grabbed her laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. Unless the authentication firm kept copies, original copies before any alleged alterations. Did they? I don't know. It's standard practice, but I never thought to ask. She pulled up an email chain, scrolling fast. Here. The contract with Meridian Forensics. They're required to maintain original copies for 7 years after case closure. So if those copies match what you submitted at trial, then Chen's entire claim falls apart. The documents couldn't have been altered if the originals match perfectly. Vivian was already dialing, phone pressed to her ear. This is Vivian Hale calling for Sarah Chen. No relation to Marcus, thank God. I need to speak with her about the Hale Industries case. Yes, it's urgent. She got transferred twice before reaching the right person, and Ethan listened to her explain the situation with a clarity that came from finally seeing a way forward. When she hung up 15 minutes later, her hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline rather than fear. They still have them, she said. The original files, complete with time-stamped metadata. Sarah's pulling them now and comparing them to what Chen submitted in his brief. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. And if they match, then we file a counter-motion, prove that Chen's lawyers either made a mistake or deliberately filed false claims. Either way, his credibility is destroyed. She laughed, high and sharp. Either way, we win. Ethan wanted to share her optimism, but 3 years of watching the justice system fail had taught him that winning and justice weren't always the same thing. Don't celebrate yet, he said. Not until we know for sure. I know. But for the first time in months, I feel like maybe this isn't hopeless. She reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you for not giving up on me. I told you I wouldn't. I know, but people say a lot of things they don't mean. I'm not people. She smiled, and Ethan saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. The sense that maybe the world wasn't entirely rigged against her. They worked until late, compiling additional evidence to support their countermotion. And when Ethan finally left to pick up Jonah from the neighbor who'd been watching him, the rain had stopped and the air smelled clean. The next 2 days crawled past. Ethan tried to stay busy with other jobs, a fence repair in town, new stairs for the Mitchells, routine maintenance that kept his hands occupied while his mind spun through every possible outcome. Vivian texted him updates every few hours, and Ethan could feel her anxiety building with each message. Still waiting. Sarah says they're being thorough. What if I'm wrong? What if the files don't match? Ethan responded to each one with the same basic message. They'll match. Trust yourself. On the 3rd day, Vivian called instead of texting. They match, she said, and Ethan heard tears in her voice. Every single file, perfect matches, down to the byte. So Chen's claim is fabricated, completely fabricated. Sarah's writing a report now, and my lawyers are drafting the countermotion. We'll file by end of week. Ethan sat down on the tailgate of his truck, relief washing over him so strong it made him dizzy. That's good. That's really good, Vivian. It's more than good. It's everything. She was crying for real now, ugly, happy sobs. We have them, Ethan. We actually have them. You had them all along. You just needed to prove it. No, we had them. I couldn't have found this without you asking the right questions. I just asked when something happened. That's not... It's everything, she said again. You see things differently than I do. You saved me. Ethan wanted to argue, to point out that she'd done the actual work. But he could hear how much she needed to believe this. Needed to believe that trusting him, letting him in, had been the right choice. "We saved each other," he said finally. "That's what people do." She laughed through the tears. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." "Did Jonah teach you that line?" "Maybe." They talked for another 20 minutes, Vivian walking him through the legal strategy while Ethan listened and tried to absorb the fact that maybe, finally, this nightmare was ending. When they hung up, he sat on the tailgate for a while longer, watching clouds move across the sky and thinking about how many times he'd almost walked away. Almost decided it was too complicated, too messy, too much risk, and how wrong he would have been. The counter-motion was filed on Friday, and by Monday morning, Marcus Chen's lawyers had requested an emergency meeting with Vivian's legal team. Ethan drove to the lake house that afternoon and found Vivian on the deck, staring at her phone like it might explode. "They want to settle," she said without preamble. Ethan sat beside her. "The civil suit?" "Everything. The suit, the falsification claims, all of it. They're offering to withdraw both cases completely if I agree not to pursue sanctions against Chen's lawyers for filing fraudulent motions." "That's it? They just give up?" "They don't have a choice. If this goes forward, Chen gets disbarred and probably charged with perjury. His lawyers lose their licenses. The original conviction stands, and they're looking at additional charges for obstruction." Vivian's voice was flat, shocked. "They're done. It's over." "So what do you want to do?" She turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you want them disbarred, charged, or do you want to just be done with it?" Vivian was quiet for a long time, watching the water. 6 months ago, I would have wanted blood, she said finally. I would have pushed for every charge, every sanction, every bit of revenge I could get. But now, she shook her head. Now I just want to be free of it. I want to wake up and not think about lawsuits or conspiracies or corporate fraud. I want to sit on this deck and drink coffee and watch the lake without feeling like I'm waiting for an attack. Then take the settlement. Just like that? Just like that. You won, Vivian. You proved they lied. You cleared your name. Everything else is just noise. But what about justice? What about making sure they pay for what they did? They already paid. They lost everything that mattered, their reputations, their careers, their freedom. Anything else is just you punishing yourself by staying connected to them. Vivian looked at him, and Ethan saw understanding dawn in her eyes. When did you get so wise about letting go? She asked. I haven't. I'm still figuring it out myself. But I know that holding on to anger just because it feels like the right thing to do doesn't actually help anyone. It just makes you tired. She leaned against him, head on his shoulder. I'm so tired, Ethan. I know, so rest. Let it go. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She called her lawyers that evening and accepted the settlement. By Wednesday, all the paperwork was signed, filed, and finalized. The civil suit was dismissed with prejudice. The falsification claims were withdrawn. The original conviction stood. And Vivian Hale was, for the first time in over a year, truly free. She didn't celebrate, didn't throw a party or make a big announcement. She just sat on her deck with Ethan and Jonah, watching the sun set over the lake, and breathed easier than she had in months. What are you going to do now? Jonah asked, dangling his fishing line in the water. Vivian thought about that. I don't know. I haven't let myself think past surviving. You could do anything, Ethan said. Start a new company, consult, disappear to an island somewhere. I could. But none of that sounds right. She looked at the house behind them, then at the deck beneath their feet. I think I just want to stay here. Build a life that's actually mine, not defined by what I lost or who hurt me. That sounds good, Jonah said seriously. You should do that. Yeah, what would that look like? The kid shrugged. I don't know, normal stuff like having friends over and going to the diner sometimes and maybe getting a dog. A dog? Every house on a lake should have a dog. It's a rule. Vivian laughed, the first real unguarded laugh Ethan had heard from her in weeks. Where'd you hear that? I made it up just now, but it's still true. He's got a point, Ethan said. Dogs are good. Are you two ganging up on me? Completely. Vivian shook her head, but she was smiling. Fine, I'll think about getting a dog. Jonah pumped his fist in victory, and Ethan caught Vivian's eye and saw something there that made his chest tight. Not just relief or happiness. Something deeper. Peace, maybe. The sense that she was finally letting herself believe this was real. That night, after Jonah fell asleep on the couch watching a movie, Ethan carried him to the truck and drove home through darkness thick with summer insects and the smell of pine. He tucked his son into bed, then stood in the doorway for a while, watching him sleep and thinking about Claire. He'd spent 3 years trying to be both mother and father to Jonah, convinced that moving on would somehow dishonor her memory. But standing there, looking at the life they'd built together, messy and imperfect and full of love, Ethan realized Claire would have wanted this, would have wanted him to find someone who made him happy, would have wanted Jonah to have more than just a father drowning in grief. "I hope you approve," he said quietly to the empty room. "I think you would have liked her." The house was silent, but Ethan felt something shift anyway. Not forgiveness, exactly. He hadn't done anything that needed forgiving. Just release. Permission to stop carrying guilt for being alive and wanting more than survival. He texted Vivian before bed. "Thinking about you." Her response came immediately. "Good thoughts, I hope? The best kind. Come over tomorrow? I want to talk about something." The message made Ethan's stomach drop. Those words, "I want to talk about something," never preceded good news. But he just told her to trust him, and trust went both ways. "Yeah," he typed back. "What time? Morning? I'll make breakfast." "You can't cook." "I can make eggs." "And toast." "That counts." Despite his anxiety, Ethan smiled. "Okay. See you in the morning." He didn't sleep well. Couldn't stop his mind from running through possibilities, most of them bad. Maybe Vivian had decided she needed space. Maybe the settlement had given her clarity, and that clarity was that being with him was too complicated. Maybe she'd realized that a billionaire and a carpenter didn't make sense in the real world, only in the weird bubble they'd created at the lake house. By the time morning came, Ethan had convinced himself he was about to get his heart broken. He was wrong. Vivian met him at the door wearing jeans and one of his old t-shirts, something she'd stolen weeks ago and never returned. She looked nervous, hands twisting together, and Ethan braced himself. "So," she said, "I've been thinking." "Okay." "About what's next. About what I want my life to look like now that I'm not fighting anymore." "Okay," Ethan said again, because he didn't trust himself to say anything else. "And I realized something. I don't want to go back to running companies or making millions or any of the things I used to think mattered. I want something smaller, something real." She took a breath. "I want you and Jonah and this house and mornings on the deck drinking coffee and evenings fishing and all the boring normal things I never let myself have before." Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. "Vivian, wait, let me finish." She stepped closer. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know there are 1,000 reasons this is probably a terrible idea. But I also know that you're the first person in my entire life who's seen me at my absolute worst and didn't run, who chose to stay even when I tried to push you away, who made me believe I could be more than just the sum of my failures. You were never just your failures. I know that now because of you." She took his hand. "So here's what I'm asking. Move in with me, you and Jonah. Not tomorrow, not even next month, but soon, when you're ready. Build a life here with me." Ethan stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You want us to move in?" "I want more than that. I want a family. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to teach Jonah to fish and help with homework and be there for baseball games and school plays and all the normal stuff that makes a life." Her voice cracked. "I want to stop being alone." "You're not alone. You haven't been alone since the day I answered your phone call. I know, but I want to make it official. I want people to know that you're mine and I'm yours and we're building something together." She paused. "What do you think?" What did he think? Ethan looked at this woman who'd walked into his life like a storm and turned everything upside down, who'd challenged him and frustrated him and made him feel things he'd thought he'd never feel again, who'd let him see her at her most vulnerable and trusted him not to break her. "I think you're right," he said. "It's fast. It's probably a terrible idea. There are going to be complications and hard conversations and moments where we both wonder what the hell we're doing." Vivian's face fell. But I don't care, because you're right about everything else too." about wanting something real, about building a life that actually fits instead of just going through the motions. He pulled her close. I love you. Jonah loves you. And yeah, we'll move in as soon as we can figure out the logistics. She kissed him hard, and Ethan tasted salt and knew she was crying again. Thank you, she whispered against his mouth. For what? For taking a chance on me. Are you kidding? You're the one taking the chance. You're getting a broke carpenter and his smart-ass kid. Best deal I ever made. They stood there in the doorway, holding each other while the morning sun turned the lake gold, and Ethan thought about all the ways life could break you. The drunk drivers and corrupt businessmen and random catastrophes that didn't care about fairness or justice or who deserved what. He thought about Claire, about the future they'd planned that would never happen. About the 3 years he'd spent convinced that moving forward meant betraying her memory. And he realized that grief and hope weren't opposites. They were neighbors. You could hold both at the same time. You could honor what you'd lost while still reaching for something new. I need to tell Jonah, he said eventually. How do you think he'll react? Honestly, I think he'll ask if he gets his own room. Vivian laughed. He does, the one at the end of the hall. It has a view of the lake. Perfect. He'll love it. They made breakfast together, eggs that were only slightly overcooked and toast that was only slightly burnt, and Ethan texted Jonah to come over when he woke up. The kid arrived an hour later on his bike, still in his pajamas, and found them on the deck. What's the emergency? He asked. No emergency, Ethan said. Just news. Good news or bad news? Good news. Vivian asked us to move in with her. Jonah's eyes went huge. For real? For real, Vivian said. If you want to, you'd have your own room, right down the hall from your dad. And I could fish whenever I want? Within reason, yeah. And we'd all live here together? Like a family? Ethan felt his throat tighten at the hope in his son's voice. Yeah, bud. Like a family. Jonah looked at Vivian, then at his dad, then back at Vivian. Can I call you Mom? The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Ethan's first instinct was to say no, to protect Claire's place in their lives, but Vivian spoke before he could. You can call me Vivian, she said gently. I'm not trying to replace your mom. Nobody could do that. But if someday you want to call me something else, something that feels right to you, we can figure it out together, okay? Jonah thought about that, then nodded. Okay. Can I see my room? Absolutely. They went inside, and Ethan listened to Jonah's excited chatter about where he'd put his posters and whether he could paint the walls, and if Vivian would really actually consider getting a dog. Her responses were patient, genuine, and Ethan fell in love with her all over again just watching her navigate his son's enthusiasm. They spent the day planning what furniture to move, what to donate, how to merge 2 separate lives into one shared space. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying in equal measure, but it felt right, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. That evening, after Jonah had gone home to start packing, Ethan and Vivian sat on the deck and watched the sun set. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified. Me too. But good terrified? Yeah, good terrified. She leaned against him. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be too good to be real. It's real. We're real. Everything else is just noise. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise I'll drive myself crazy. Vivian laughed. Fair enough. They sat in comfortable silence until the stars came out, and Ethan thought about the phone call that had started everything. Vivian's voice in the dark, offering him money to rebuild a deck, and how he'd almost said no. Almost hung up and gone back to his carefully controlled life, where nothing hurt because nothing mattered enough to hurt. Can I tell you something? He said. Always. That night you called me. I almost didn't answer. It was late. I didn't recognize the number, and I was tired, but something made me pick up anyway. Fate? Vivian said it like a joke, but Ethan heard the question underneath. I don't know about fate, but I know I'm glad I answered, even knowing everything that came after. All the complications and fights and fear. I'd do it all again. Yeah? Yeah. Vivian turned to kiss him, soft and slow, and Ethan tasted possibility. The chance to build something that wasn't defined by loss or fear or all the ways the world had broken them. Something new. something theirs. The move happened gradually over the next month. Ethan didn't want to rush Jonah, wanted to make sure the kid had time to process the change and say goodbye to the house where he'd grown up. They packed room by room, and with each box, Ethan felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting. Not disappearing, Claire's memory would always be part of them, but transforming into something he could carry without it crushing him. Vivian helped, even though she was terrible at packing and kept getting distracted by old photos and asking questions about Ethan's history. She wanted to know everything, where he'd grown up, what he'd been like as a kid, what Claire had seen in him. And Ethan found himself telling her things he hadn't talked about in years, stories he'd locked away because remembering hurt too much. But with Vivian, remembering felt different. Not like reopening wounds, but like honoring something that mattered. She listened without judgment, asked questions without pity, and somehow made space for Claire in their new life instead of pretending she'd never existed. "She sounds amazing," Vivian said one afternoon, looking at a photo of Claire and Ethan on their wedding day. "She was. You would have liked her. I think I would have been intimidated by her. She looks fearless." She was, right up until the end. Ethan took the photo and packed it carefully in a box marked for Jonah's room. "I used to think that was the worst part, that she didn't have time to be scared. But now I think maybe it was a blessing. She didn't suffer, didn't have time to regret anything. She just left." "Do you think she'd approve of us?" Ethan thought about that seriously because Vivian deserved a serious answer. "Yeah," he said. "I think she'd be glad I found someone who makes me want to be better, who makes Jonah happy, who doesn't let me hide behind work and grief and all the excuses I used to keep people out." That's a very diplomatic way of saying I'm pushy. You're persistent. There's a difference. Is there? Absolutely. Pushy is annoying. Persistent is attractive. Vivian threw a wadded-up piece of packing paper at him, and they dissolved into the kind of easy laughter that came from knowing someone well enough to tease them. By mid-August, the move was complete. Jonah's room was full of posters and books, and the organized chaos only a 9-year-old could create. Ethan and Vivian's room overlooked the lake, morning sun streaming through windows that framed the view like a painting. The house felt lived in now, full of sound and movement, and the particular mess that came from multiple people sharing space. They established routines, breakfast on the deck when the weather allowed, Jonah fishing while Ethan worked on the endless list of repairs every old house needed, family dinners where they took turns cooking, or in Vivian's case, ordering takeout and pretending she'd made it, movie nights on Fridays, church on Sundays, except they didn't go to church. They just took the morning slow, drinking coffee and reading and enjoying the quiet. It wasn't perfect. Jonah and Vivian had a huge fight about bedtime that ended with both of them in tears and Ethan mediating like a hostage negotiator. Ethan and Vivian argued about money, her wanting to pay for everything, him needing to contribute, both of them too stubborn to compromise easily. There were adjustments and missteps and moments when all three of them wondered if they'd made a huge mistake. But they worked through it, talked instead of running, asked for help instead of pretending everything was fine, and slowly, painfully, built something that felt like home. In September, Vivian made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She contacted several of the former employees who'd lost their jobs when her company imploded and offered them seed money to start their own businesses. Not charity, investments, with her as a silent partner. She wanted to help rebuild what had been destroyed, wanted to use her resources for something other than lawyers and lawsuits. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said when she told him about it. "I know. But I want to. Those people lost everything because of me. Not because of you, because of Chen and the others. Same difference. I was in charge. I should have seen it. You can't fix everything by throwing money at it. I know that too, but I can fix some things, and that's better than nothing." Ethan pulled her close. "You're a good person. You know that?" "I'm really not. I'm just trying to be less terrible." "That's what good people say." The investments paid off. Within 6 months, 3 of the businesses were turning profits, and 2 others showed serious promise. Vivian started getting calls from other investors, people who wanted her expertise and advice. She turned down most of them, but accepted a few consulting contracts, working from home and setting her own hours. "It's strange," she told Ethan one evening. "I spent 20 years building an empire, and now I'm happier helping other people build theirs. That's because you're doing it on your terms, for the right reasons. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just getting old and realizing empires are overrated. You're 37. That's not old. Tell that to my knees when I try to keep up with Jonah. They were on the deck. Where else? Watching the kid practice casting into the lake. He'd gotten good over the summer, could drop a lure exactly where he wanted it, and Vivian had started talking about entering him in one of the local fishing tournaments. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Always. Are you happy? Vivian turned to look at him, and Ethan saw surprise in her expression. Yeah, I am. Are you? Yeah. And he meant it. Not the fragile happiness that came from pretending everything was okay, but the deep, solid kind that came from building something real. I really am. Good. She kissed him, quick and sweet. Because I plan on keeping you around for a very long time. How long? Forever, if you'll let me. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Forever meant marriage, meant permanent, meant choosing each other not just for now but for all the uncertain, complicated, beautiful tomorrows that lay ahead. I think I could do forever, Ethan said carefully. Yeah? Yeah. If you're asking, I'm asking. Ethan kissed her properly then, putting everything he couldn't say into the contact, and Vivian kissed him back with the same fierce certainty that had made her face down corrupt executives and federal prosecutors and her own crushing fear. When they broke apart, Jonah was watching them with undisguised glee. Does this mean you're getting married? He called. Maybe, Ethan called back. Cool, can I be the best man? You're 9. So, I'm very mature for my age. Vivian was laughing so hard she could barely breathe, and Ethan found himself laughing too, the sound coming from somewhere deep and true. They didn't get married right away. Took their time, let the idea settle, made sure they were doing it for the right reasons, and not just because it seemed like the logical next step. But by Christmas, Ethan had bought a ring, nothing fancy, just a simple band that matched the life they were building, and he was waiting for the right moment to ask. The moment came on New Year's Eve. They'd planned a quiet evening at home, just the 3 of them, but when midnight approached, Vivian suggested they go out to the deck to watch the fireworks from town. They bundled up against the cold, Jonah wedged between them on the bench, and watched colored light bloom across the sky. When the display ended and the night went quiet again, Ethan pulled the ring from his pocket. Vivian? She turned, saw what he was holding, and her hand flew to her mouth. I'm not good at speeches, Ethan said. And I'm probably doing this all wrong. But I love you. I love the life we've built. I love that you let Jonah call you by your first name, but you're still his fiercest defender. I love that you still can't cook anything except soup, but you keep trying anyway. I love that you answered a phone call from a stranger and somehow ended up here, with us, building something neither of us could have planned. Ethan, let me finish. I know I'm not what you probably pictured when you thought about getting married. I know I come with complications and a kid and a whole lot of baggage. But if you'll have me, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know you're loved, that you're safe, that you're home. He opened the box, and even in the dim light from the house, the ring caught and held the glow. Will you marry me? Vivian was crying, nodding, laughing all at once. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. Ethan slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and Jonah whooped loud enough to wake the neighbors half a mile away. They kissed while their son cheered, and Ethan felt something click into place that he hadn't known was misaligned. This was it. This was the life he was supposed to have. Not the one he'd planned with Claire. That future had died with her, and grieving it was right and necessary. But this new future, built on ruins and hope, and the stubborn refusal to give up on happiness, was just as real, just as worthy. I love you, Vivian whispered against his mouth. I love you too. Forever? Forever. They got married in March, on the deck Ethan had built, with Jonah officiating after getting ordained online specifically for this purpose. It was small, just a few friends from town, Vivian's lawyer Sarah, and Claire's parents, who cried through the whole ceremony and told Ethan afterward that they were happy for him, that Claire would have been happy for him. She would have liked Vivian, Claire's mother said, hugging him tight. She always said you needed someone who'd call you on your bullshit. That's Vivian, all right. Take care of each other. We will. The reception was potluck in the backyard, and Ethan spent most of it watching Vivian teach Jonah how to dance while music played from someone's portable speaker. She was terrible at dancing, kept stepping on the kid's feet, but Jonah didn't care. He was laughing, spinning her in circles, and Ethan felt his heart swell so big it hurt. This was family. Not the picture-perfect version from magazines, but the real thing. Messy and complicated and built on the understanding that love meant showing up even when it was hard, meant choosing each other every single day. Later, when the guests had gone home and Jonah had crashed hard in his room, Ethan and Vivian sat on their deck, built with his hands and her money and their combined hope, and watched the moon rise over the lake. "Happy?" he asked. "Ridiculously happy," Vivian said. "You?" "Yeah, I really am." "No regrets?" "Not one." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the wind and the particular quiet that came from being exactly where you were supposed to be. Ethan thought about the phone call that had started everything, about standing on a rotting deck above black water, thinking he was just there to rebuild some rich person's vanity project. He'd had no idea he was actually there to rebuild himself, to learn that grief didn't have to be the end of the story, that loving someone new didn't erase the person you'd loved before. That family wasn't just biology, it was choice. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "For what?" "For answering the phone. Thank you for calling. We're quite the pair, aren't we? Two broken people who somehow managed to fix each other." "I don't think we fixed each other," Ethan said. "I think we just gave each other a safe place to heal." "That's very wise." "Jonah would say I stole it from TV." Vivian laughed, and the sound carried across the water, echoing back from the far shore like the lake itself was celebrating. They stayed there until the stars came out in force, mapping constellations and making plans for the future. Jonah wanted to try kayaking in the summer. Vivian was thinking about starting a foundation to help other whistleblowers. Ethan had been approached about teaching a woodworking class at the community center. Small things. Normal things. The kind of life that didn't make headlines but made waking up worthwhile. "I'm glad you bought this house," Ethan said eventually. "Me too, even though the deck was a death trap. Especially because the deck was a death trap. Otherwise you wouldn't have called me." "Fate?" "Maybe. Or maybe just luck. I'll take either one." They went inside eventually, climbing stairs to a bedroom that was theirs, in a house that was theirs, in a life they'd built from scratch out of grief and courage and the stubborn belief that broken things could become beautiful if you were willing to do the work. And as Ethan fell asleep with Vivian curled against him and Jonah safe down the hall, he realized something fundamental had shifted. For 3 years, he'd been surviving. Just getting through each day, focused on not falling apart, convinced that was the best he could hope for. But survival wasn't the same as living. Living meant taking risks, meant opening yourself up to pain because that was the only way to open yourself up to joy, meant building something new even when you were terrified it would all come crashing down. The deck had been the first thing he'd built for Vivian, solid and level and strong enough to hold whatever weight was put on it. But it turned out they'd been building something else the whole time. Something bigger. A foundation for a life that fit them both, that had room for their scars and their hopes and all the complicated, beautiful mess that came with being human. Outside, the lake whispered against the shore. Inside, his family slept. And Ethan Rowe, carpenter and widower and father and husband, finally let himself believe that this was real, that he deserved it, that loving someone new didn't mean betraying someone old, that he was, at last, home. The deck would need maintenance eventually. All things did. But it was built to last. Built with care and attention, and the understanding that the strongest structures weren't the ones that never broke. They were the ones that were rebuilt better after breaking. Just like him. Just like Vivian. Just like all of them.